Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything.
Welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen, and I'm so excited to walk through 1 Peter with you in our year-long study of the New Testament. Today we're in 1 Peter 5, and as always, you can find the Behold Studies and the free reading plan linked in the show notes. As Peter writes to the suffering Christians through Asia Minor, he encourages his audience to remember their responsibilities and their sufferings in light of Christ's return. In the grand expanse of eternity with Jesus, indeed, our sufferings today last merely a little while. As Peter has reminded Christians so far through his letter, there is sure hope to come. First, Peter calls elders to humility, reminding them to shepherd God's flock both willingly and responsibly. Peter teaches that their lives should be examples to the flock. This sounds like Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Imitate me as I also imitate Christ. The elders of the churches are to lay down their lives for others as Christ has laid down his life for them, not out of force, but out of willingness. Leading others through suffering is not an easy task, and so as these leaders persevere, Peter reminds them of their hope. As they humbly persevere, serving others in Christ's footsteps, they will receive the crown of unfading glory when they finally meet Jesus. Humility now, glory later. Peter also calls those who are young with the church to be subject to the elders, clothing themselves with humility. This continues on a theme we've seen within 1 Peter, submission. Peter calls all believers to submission, a commitment to serve and respect others as we serve and revere Christ. This isn't just for the young in the church. It's a church-wide calling to put others before ourselves. Speaking of humility, Peter begins verse 6 with, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time." Humility now, glory later. But what is so beautiful about the Christian faith is that even while the devil prowls around, even while we are called to lower ourselves and lift others, we have the privilege of casting our cares upon God because Peter tells us that he cares for us. Yes, the creator of heaven and earth, the painter of the skies and the author of history cares for you, cares for your burdens. His spirit is with you always, helping to resist the schemes of Satan. Jesus helps you stand firm in the faith. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says he comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through the comfort we ourselves receive from God. We are not alone, but instead our experiences can one day bolster the faith of someone else in their season of trial. Peter reminds his audience that they are part of the church body that suffers together and succeeds together. But ultimately, our success is Christ. Verse 10 says, "The God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, establish, strengthen, and support you after you have suffered a little while." A little while is how Peter describes our life on earth. After this present-day suffering, God will glorify those in his Son, restore them, establish them, strengthen them, and support them. What's so beautiful about Peter's words here is that he speaks them from personal example. Peter, the disciple who denied Jesus 3 times before his death, and yet after Jesus' resurrection, Jesus himself restored Peter and established him as a leader of the early church in John 21. Peter's life is a life of restoration in Christ, and he is confident that this is what is in store for all believers. Before Peter closes his letter, he tells us of his purpose in writing, to encourage believers to stand firm in the true grace of God. All that he's written is for the good and endurance of those in Christ. In verse 13, Peter cryptically sends greetings from those in Babylon. Scholars believe that this is likely a covert reference to Rome. That means that if Peter is writing from Rome, he is in the heart of the persecution himself. Peter writes this letter as one who is also suffering with endurance, who is humbling himself for the glory that awaits him in Christ. Peter imitates his beloved rabbi, the man he followed and studied for 3 years, the one whom he lives to magnify. Peter imitates Jesus and calls us to today. Humility now, glory later is what Jesus modeled with his life. Philippians 2 beautifully proclaims, Jesus, who existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity, and when he had become as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. For this reason, Jesus was exalted. For this reason, Jesus was seated at the right hand of God. When we humble ourselves, when we choose to wait for the best good ahead, we model our lives after Christ. In the grand span of eternity, our suffering today is a little while. But in Jesus, it matters. He doesn't waste it. He redeems it. He uses it to bring others to Christ. He uses it to bring beauty out of ashes, so that your story may be his work for restoration, so that your faith will strengthen, and that you may tell of his glory to all who are privileged to hear of his work within you. There is hope in our suffering. There is joy in perseverance. Not only do we know our lives matter, we know that Jesus dwells with us. Indeed, we are not alone today, and we will never be alone. 1 Peter reminds us that we have hope.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.